Well, a big aloha and mahalo, John. I appreciate you taking time to do this. It's nice to speak with you again. You've been our guest several times over the years, and we're always grateful for your time.
Thank you, Dave.
And this is a special time because before we get into this new single, Firstborn Leader, what an incredible tune, too. Just the latest single from your album, 1,000 Hands. We're having you on, John, as part of a series we've been doing with all kinds of artists. They're sharing how they've been touched by the pandemic and other crises taking place right now. First, where are you? And is this where you've been throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm in my studio cottage. Me and my wife, Jane, we live in Central California, up away from the hustle bustle of the village. It's really beautiful.
When the thing first started, explain the ways that you first became aware of it, any ways it's impacted your touring, and obviously the release of tunes from this magical album.
The day that we were told to stay indoors and away from the world was the day that I broke my foot getting the barbecue ready. So I was... That was 4 months ago. And I had to wear a boot. And my beautiful wife, Jane, had to do all the work and do the cooking and cleaning. And I couldn't lift anything because I was always out of balance. But I spent all the time in the studio, which was a breakthrough on many levels.
Right.
So I've been able to get on with some projects that needed finishing.
Right, because the way it worked out, I was also looking at your website for tours and stuff like that in terms of dates. Has this forced the cancellation or postponement of tour dates? Like, how is that working out? What do you see happening on the front of rescheduling anything?
Next year, I'm not looking forward to going out now because it all looks pretty chaotic to me. I had to cancel 2 projects. One was with the Academy of Music teenagers. I was going to tour with them in Europe and in America because I started touring with the School of Rock 2004, 2005 period. And it was wonderful working with young teenagers, that's for sure. And then the guy that runs this show, which is a guy called Paul Green. He started off the Academy of Rock, if you like. And we actually, last year, they came on tour with us, about a dozen young, crazy teenagers. So we canceled that. And then this October, we were going to do a promotion of the album with the 1,000 Hands Band, which is a fantastic band. But that's not going to happen. So I'll just get on with my work.
How is your foot? Have you recovered on the foot front?
Yeah, I took the boot off just 3 weeks ago, and it's a slow process. They say another 4 weeks, and I should be running around and jumping around like an idiot.
Well,
so we'll see.
What fortuitous timing! If something like that had to happen, it happens when no benefit to your wife to pick up extra work, but at least you weren't having to be out on the road or anything. It was like convenient.
No, not at all. But this last month, I've been able to cook and clean and wash up and do the mandatory things you got to do when you live together. You want to take care of everything. So I'm pretty happy about the way it's going.
Well, it's great. I mean, and you look great and you sound great as always. And you're also, like you said, you're staying really busy there musically, which is nice. John is in his home studio there, as he said, so he's got the ability to continue to work and make music during this thing. And it made me think, as I was taking a listen to the record, which we're about to talk about, when I thought of some of the cats like Manu Dibango and Ellis Marsalis, John Prine, there were a number of great musicians who we lost early in the crisis. And you're such a fan of so many different kinds of music. One listen to this record and you'll hear little bits of a lot of the, sort of references to the people I mentioned. Can you talk about the ways you've been touched by anybody that has passed away or some of those experiences in terms of the loss?
Well, I put on my website about 2 months ago that there's a lot of people going to heaven. And if you think about it, if you have 100 people dying, that means 1,000 people are mourning. And so there are 1 million people lots of people around the world mourning the death of loved ones and things like that. And that's something that I put in my website. We should say a prayer now and again for that. Anybody that I know passing away, no, I don't know anybody.
Oh, you've been fortunate.
And, yeah, very lucky. My grandkids and my daughter and her husband live in LA, so I'm always thinking about them. And we do a lot of FaceTime. That's a very good thing.
So you're kind of secluded from them. I'm reading into that. Are you keeping away from folks to stay safe?
Yeah, simply because, I'm 75. I'm an asthmatic, so I nearly died 12 years ago.
Right.
Went into a coma and don't want to do that again.
No, well, you have to stay safe, and it's an important time. It's interesting what you were talking about, the prayer, too. John sent us a prayer song, Divine Mother 2020, for us to play, and again, a symbol of what you've been up to, busy in your studio right there, and a spiritual and inspirational extension from you. Speak about this recording.
Well, it started probably in 1987, making a record. And I think I was doing a Christmas album. And this lady that I'd met called Linda Livingston, she kept saying, "You've got to meet this lady from Hawaii. She's coming soon." And I said to her, "Okay, no problem. No, it's Divine Mother Flora. She's really the real thing." And I'd say, "Well, I've met some gurus and they're okay. I don't really want to meet anymore." But she kept pestering me to meet this lady, Divine Mother Flora. And 3 weeks later, Linda called me and said, "She's arriving tomorrow. You got to come and see her. She's staying with some friends near the airport." And I said, "Okay." So I went to this house, and all these people, there was only about 4 people there. They were from Hawaii and Asian. And so I walked in, and there was this little lady on a couch surrounded by flowers. She reminded me of my mother very much. And I've been trying to meditate for years at that point in time. And she said, "Sit down," and asked my name. And she looked at me, she said, "You know something?" I said, "Nope. That's why I'm here." She said, "Well, God is free." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You've been trying to meditate." And I said, "Yeah, I just can't stop the ego mind, And she said, "Well, let's meditate." And we did. And I went somewhere with her in this meditation into a wonderful, incredible heavenness of something. I don't know where. I even stopped breathing. I could tell that in my meditation. But there I was in this beautiful energy. And some 15, 20 minutes later, I came back down to where I was. And she looked at me and said, "You're very ripe. And now you know where to go. You have to practice, okay?" So I said, "Thank you very much." And she gave me a prayer in my meditation. And it reads, "Thou art mother, thou art father, thou art friend and companion," and so on. And so I went off on tour. I was in Paris when I was still trying to remember the prayer. It was just driving me crazy. So I actually wrote a song of the prayer song. So I just sent you, and you can play that to the folks listening on the radio. And
that's really cool.
Then on, it was a question of realizing my spiritual path was now embedded in me, and I started to grow ever so slowly into a more. I accepted that is part of my upbringing, my life is part of my musical life, of course. And I've been singing about spiritual things all the time in many different ways with Yes. And so in a way, it felt the right time to be awakened, if you like.
What a great thing that it's connected to Hawaii like that. That's really powerful. And quite a story there, and a deep connection to the islands that I'm sure people will really appreciate. And that's smart of you. The good way to remember the words, put it in a song, then you can always
Yeah.
immortalize
And I
it.
had many, many events. Well, me and my wife would go to Kauai almost every year. And some 12 years ago, I got caught in a riptide, nearly drowned on the northern coast of Kauai.
Wow.
And I couldn't get back. I was in a panic, and my asthma kicked in, and I could hardly breathe. And I was dog paddling, trying to get over the big waves because I'd gone way out, some 40 feet into the sea. And in my head said, just lie back, relax, just lie back. So I'm lying there on the ocean looking up, thinking, I wonder if the helicopters are going to come and get me. And I said goodbye to my wife and my children
Oh,
and
wow.
everybody that I know. I did. And then the voice said, now, John. And I was going up with the waves, the big waves. I was going up with them. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get thrown back to the beach. And I didn't get thrown back to the beach. I got thrown onto the coral.
Oh.
Pretty high up there. And I'm holding on to the coral, and I saw one guy walking down the sand, a local guy, and I start waving to him. And he waved back and carried on walking. It was like a cartoon. And eventually a lifesaver came and plucked me out of the water. My wife came running and looked after me and everything. But it was so strange that the guy would wave back.
He thought you were just
I met
waiting.
him the day afterwards, and he said he was sorry. I said, don't worry about it. And then where I got caught in the riptide, they actually put a sign up the following day, beware of riptides.
That's so funny. You said it broke up. You met the guy the next day. What happened?
Well, I said, how you doing? He said, oh, I'm sorry about yesterday. And he was a local.
Were you at Hanalei Bay?
And yeah. No, it's further up than there. It was near, what do they call it?
Like the end of the road, sort of, that last...
End of the North Road. You go over the bridges and so on.
I know where you're talking. The last
It's up there.
beach. That's a rough
But
spot.
it was funny at the time.
Well, it's a great story. Yeah, I can see the comedy of that. You're like hoping for a rescue. Oh, not so fast. But
Uh-oh.
what are other experiences here that you had that stick out?
Well, I'd been to Indonesia after I met Divine Mother Flora. I would stop in Honolulu and spend a little time with Divine Mother. And there was one time I'd been to Indonesia, and I'd been on this island called Tiaman, which is well known in the Indonesian world as a very magical island. And I had this visitation of, one might say, a diva or a fairy came into my bedroom and started flying over my head and said a couple of things which were kind of cool. That the deviant world had a real good contact with Walt Disney in his dreams. That's why Walt Disney did what he did.
Wow.
And a couple of other things. So I was telling this lady that I knew on the beach there in Honolulu. Her name was Jocelyn Fuji. She's a writer. And she said, oh, I like what you're saying. You've got to meet Nanaviri. And I said, who's that? She said, oh, it's this lady. She's a real shaman. And she actually sings with the fairies in Kauai when she goes to Kauai, sort of thing. And I said, oh, I got to meet her. That would be so cool. Wow. So I met this lady who was very tall, actually, with a beautiful white sort of crown of her hair. Beautiful. And we hugged, and she sort of hugged and shaking like a big tree. She was amazingly big. And she laughed a lot when she was hugging me. And then she cried a little bit. And then she said, why don't you come to Kauai with us in a month's time? We're going on a silence up in the mountains. And I said, okay, I can do that. So we met a month later at the airport, and off we went to Kauai. and went up into Cocky Lodge.
Wow.
And it was just an extraordinary event. And she actually wrote a book called Change We Must. And I remember writing a song about that for an album that I did in 1992. So the connections that I have with Hawaii from a spiritual standpoint are very, very powerful.
Yeah, no, they're very powerful, and that's amazing
Yeah.
that you would have those kind of experiences. From what I've read, thinking about the spiritual aspect of these kinds of things, what you're talking about, it's interesting connection with this new song that you have released from 1,000 Hands. It's Firstborn Leaders, and when you think about the lyrics to something like that after what we were just talking about, give a little bit of insight to folks, because it's a very spiritual album too that you've been releasing here.
I think it's because I recorded most of the songs in the mountains of Big Bear near Los Angeles in 1990, learning about meditation. So I was enjoying myself. I was very clear in my head about what I'd like to sing about. And everything's a challenge. So most of the songs are about how we go through these challenges. In fact, Firstborn Leaders is really about the people that woke up in the 60s. And I just believe that we are part of the vanguard of openness and spirituality and awakening and, being very grateful for life and for Mother Earth and helping to be the gardeners of the earth, because we are. That's what we're supposed to be doing, taking care of Mother Earth instead of destroying it. And I was reading something, I'm watching a program that was sent to me by my new Divine Mother, is a lady called Audrey Kitagawa, and she took on the mantle from Divine Mother Flora at the beginning of 92, 91, 92. And she then, Divine Mother Audrey Kitagawa was a lawyer, practicing lawyer in Honolulu. And she immediately went to New York to work with Kofi Annan at the United Nations. She's traveled the world opening up the spiritual consciousness of the world and slowly doing that. Because in fact, I was told that Hawaii is the heart chakra of the planet. And I'm sure it is. There's something very, very special. Anyway.
That's a great link, though, both to the album, to Hawaii, to the spirituality. I mean, it's great how close it is, and that it's cool. This goes back. You kind of answered it. This is an album that has roots going back several decades, and that Jon was kind of shelved, started working on at that time, then eventually revived. And you didn't just revive it. There is this, when you think about the record, it's pretty impressive in the number of folks you've included. In fact, the title kind of refers, 1,000 Hands, to the number of folks you kind of credit. I was hoping maybe we could go through some of that list of guest artists. Maybe you could share how far back you go with some of them, any interesting stories, because man, what a list it is.
Yeah, when I started the album with my friend Brian Chatton, who was in my original band in the Sitka Warriors, and he is a keyboard player, and he'd been on tour with the likes of B.B. King and other wonderful musicians, and we bumped into each other in LA as I was going up to Big Bear, which is just southeast of Los Angeles, and I told him to write some music and send me a cassette, which he did. And I took that up to Big Bear in the mountains there near the ski resort, so I could go skiing every morning, which was fun.
Wow.
And then work all afternoon. And I had some musicians come up, and Brian came up. Keith Hefner came up, a great friend of mine, keyboard player. And Gary Barlow, who was helping to produce it as well. And so we would record these songs. And I kept saying to Brian, we should call the album Us-Lot, which is a sort of North Country way of saying a lot of us.
Right.
Because I'd say, hey, Us-Lot, let's go and play football, something like that, when you're a kid. So Oslot stuck there. I thought, what I want to try and do is, I found out that Chris Squire and Alan White were in Los Angeles, so I went down with the tape and got them to play on 2 songs. And then I was in touch with a guy from the Beach Boys, Bruce Johnson, and went to see him. In fact, I drove up to see him the day of the LA riots.
Wow.
1991, I think it was. And I was going to try and get them to sing on the album. So maybe I'll get them to sing on chapter 2, if they will. But when I got contacted by the producer, Michael Franklin, who lives in Orlando, he called me about 2 years ago and said, look, John, you know those tapes you were working on with Brian Chatton up in Big Bear? I said, oh, yeah. Where are they? I said, I think they're in my garage. So I went and I got these very big tapes, the 24-track tapes. And I sent them all to Michael Franklin, and he put them in an oven. You have to bake them. Right, yeah. And then they can only play once because they've been sitting around. It's tape, it'll just dissolve. It'll just play once and then go straight to the computer. And that's basically what happened. And he did some quick mixes of the tapes and of the recordings through the internet, MP3s. And I listened and went, oh my gosh, they sound really good. And he said, you mentioned you wanted to put musicians on that you like. And I said, well, I like Billy Cobham. And I really like Ian Anderson and Jean-Luc Ponty. I'd just been on tour with him. And Michael said, I know Chick Corea. And I went, oh, quick. So all of a sudden, these people started playing on the record. And thankfully, Michael Franklin just seemed to know the right people. He got the Tower of Power brass section to play on some songs. And then I added 2 or 3 new songs, which were my idea of what I do in the morning is get up and start vocalizing, which is sort of chanting in a way. And there's a couple of songs we use those chants for. One is called Rama Lama, and the other one is for Where Does Music Come From? And they're just me vocal tapes of everything that I'm doing. And he added all the music, Michael. So it's kind of interesting how right towards the end of the album, we had a song called Now, which basically sings about living in the moment and enjoying the moment rather than the past or future. Just enjoy the day. And originally it was a song I did in the mountains, and it's a 3-minute song, but it didn't really sing too well. So we put one part at the beginning of the album, one part in the middle with orchestra, and one part at the end with some more orchestral ideas. And just when we were finishing the album about 1.5 years ago, I said to Michael, this last Now, I think I should ask Steve Howe to play on it, because it would be kind of cool that I've got, Chris Squire, Alan White, and then Steve Howe to play on it.
Yeah. And
he did. And when I heard it, the first thing I did, I just sang with him. It was just a magical moment for me. So there's so much that went into making the album. It's quite an extraordinary adventure.
It is, and some of these cats no longer with us, which is kind of, so that was that among, because you have Larry Coryell and Chris Squire on there, were both of those among their final sort of recordings too? I'm sure
I'm sure Chris was doing, we actually toured together in 2000.
When did you record his?
In 1990.
Okay, so you had Chris way back in the can a long time back. I get
amazing.
But how about the Larry Coryell? What time was that recorded?
I think it was about early last January or something like that.
Okay, so that would be more recent and towards the end of his life. Because he didn't, because he passed much more recently there. So the Chris thing was recorded a ways back. That's amazing.
Yeah, Chris and Alan, yeah.
Right, and you just go, and the Steve one, no, those guys, when you, because you go back with them, of all the people on the record, 2 questions came to mind. I guess first is, when you name all those different things, were most of those done, John, just independently, meaning you weren't there, the producer guy was able to record them separately and just mix them in? You were not there when they recorded, correct?
These days you can send a tape to I know Chick Corea came into the studio, Billy Cobham. Jean-Luc has a studio in Switzerland, so we sent him the song and he played on it.
I get it.
And it was magic because in the middle of the song, Come Up, you have Jean-Luc coming in with the violin just at the right time with an incredible run with the snare drum. It's kind of, that was put on 6 months earlier. Yeah.
It's totally audio magic, and it's beautiful, and it's a great way that technology has made it even easier, because folks have done it that way for a long time, but now even more so, it's invaluable. And then I guess the second question was when I think, because you kind of singled out your Yes colleagues that you've had. You go back, of all the people who guest on this truly all-star record, and again, it's Jon Anderson talking about 1,000 Hands. Of all the people on here, Jon, the ones you personally go back the furthest with would be the gang from Yes. When can you remember when you first met any of those guys, Steve or Chris? Or
Well, I met Chris in a bar that I was working in, and the bar was above a very famous rock and roll club called the Marquee Club in London.
Yeah.
And whoever played in the Marquee would come up into the bar before the show and after the show, and I'd be cleaning up and tidying up and, just generally helping. And in one evening, you could have like Pete Townsend would come up with Keith Moon, because the Who were playing downstairs in the club. And there was Eric Clapton, and then a couple of guys from Led Zeppelin, and it's even Jimi Hendrix came in one time, and I never spoke to them because I was so kind of shy in a way, and it was a remarkable period because I wanted to join a band. I'd been working with my first band, the Warriors, for 5 years, and I'd left them in Germany because they wouldn't get out of bed and rehearse. And it got me so upset. So I left them. Well, they told me to get away, in not those words, but they told me to go away about 3 or 4 times in the morning, because I said, come on, guys, we could write some new songs. We could do this, that. John, just go away. So I went. And then eventually I found myself in London, and Brian Chapman was there. So we got on very well, and I worked in this club. And one night, the owner of the club, Jack, said, there's a guy in the corner there by himself. He has a band, and I think he's looking for a singer. So I walk over to this very tall man who's 6'3", and looked up to him and said, hi, I'm Jon Anderson. Who are you? And he said, my name's Chris Squire. And I said, oh, cool. So we started talking about music in general, and we had a definite like for Simon and Garfunkel record that's just been released. We love the Beatles, of course. We love Frank Zappa. We talked about Buffalo Springfield and music like that. And so went back to his apartment. We wrote a couple of songs together. He played me some tapes of his band.
What was it called?
Mabel Greer's Toy Shop. And I used to say, that's a very long title for a band, we've got to shorten it up. So I went to rehearsals about 2 days later, and the drummer left. So there was a band with Chris, a guitarist, Peter Banks, and a keyboard player, Tony Kaye, who I knew from Birmingham. I'd seen him many times with his band up there. So we started looking for a drummer. In the newspaper, you get the Melody Maker, and you look at the back for advertising, and there was an advertisement, and it said, drummer looking for band. I have a Ludwig kit and a van. So right away we said, quick, let's get him in. He's got a band. Whether he can play, I don't know. And then Bill Bruford turned up the following day with a minivan. It was like a mini car van. It was so small. So he had his Ludwig kit, which wasn't really a Ludwig kit. It was an old, cheap kit, black, and it looked kind of cool. So he said, okay. But man, he could play great. So we started playing and rehearsing, and that's how the band started going.
It's incredible. I mean, it's and
Yeah.
I mean, and neat that you come full circle to be able to have a representation of the group on the album in the way that you have, and so many other cats who have been a part of it. As we go to wrap it up with you. When you've obviously made that decision, like most artists have, to stay off the road at the moment because it's really impossible. Different parts of the country, you see things like drive-in concerts happening here and there. You see
Yeah.
ideas like that. For a guy like yourself, you're a good guy to ask because, as you were just describing, you've been part of this business going back for many, 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 many decades. What do you envision, Jon, in terms of a guy who has your pulse on how touring is done? How could it ever work again with both the guys in the crew and the bands being safe and the fans and the venues still being able to make money yet keep people separated? Do you see a way it's going to happen, or what do you think?
It'll take time. There's something that we're going through, which is to wake us up to a lot of misunderstandings. The world is so mismanaged on many levels, and we're all waiting for that time to come to wake us all up to a better future for our children and for all people. And that's the time that's coming now. And I think that the virus has come through a very, very, very simple problem, and that's deforestation, which, if you have deforestation all over the world, all these animals and insects all come together where they're not supposed to be, and that's what creates disease. And we've got to learn to manage and garden the earth properly. And so the music that's going to keep it going, believe me, there's so many great musicians out there, young people, so exciting to listen to. One of my favorites is Jacob Collier, who is quite extraordinary. And he's one of a lot of young musicians. It reminds me of the 60s when I first went to see the Beatles with my brother in 1963. It was such a revelation. And this is happening again now through the internet. There are so many wonderful talents out there through the internet. You can see them on YouTube every day. Remarkable people. So music is coming to help us into the next understanding of why we live,
And it's great that you mentioned that with the 60s and the memory of going to see the Beatles when you were so young, in that important decade when not only music was getting shaped and the beginning of your career, but also that was when the civil rights era really was taking hold in the United States. And when you look at what's happened in the U.S. more recently with the Black Lives Matter, with the police reform, and you think about you, a guy who actually can remember and was there and saw the initial era of the civil rights movement in the U.S., and there you are, you're living here in this country. What's your perception of that issue, and how does it make you feel, some of the things that have transpired?
Well, it's a conversation, and the conversation is very simple in a way. Canada, 4 years ago, asked the North American Indians for forgiveness. They did to them the terrible things that they did to their children in the last 2 centuries and not too long ago, probably 7 years ago, Australia had the sorry day where they asked the Aborigines for forgiveness for the incredible, stupid maltreatment of the native people there, the Aborigines. So America is stuck. It cannot, and the terrible American and the European presence in Hawaii was horrible and very hard to think about in so many ways. But the Native Americans have been treated, and the genocide that went on. There's got to be a point where we ask them for forgiveness for what white people did to the red man, I know it's a tough decision to make, but it's got to happen before we can evolve, because we're all one in the eyes of the gods of the world. We're all one being. We're all one. We're all connected through the internet for the first time in the history of human experience. We're all connected around the world. So isn't this a great moment to be able to free ourselves of the dogma of everything that doesn't seem to work? Because obviously, I believe in all religions. I really do. I think they're all connected. And that's what Divine Mother talks about. And coming under the guy that was one of the first people to talk about interconnected religions with Ramakrishna. And he would say that, of course, Jesus is a Christ, Mohammed is a Christ, Krishna is a Christ, Buddha is a Christ. We are all Christ energy. These were our teachers. So in a way, to keep the conversation going, there has got to come a time when all the wrongs that have been done by the white people, the European people, have got to come under scrutiny. Not only Black Lives Matter, but Red Lives Matter and Yellow Lives Matter and all lives matter. And I really think this is sort of the tipping block of at least getting it into place for the future of our children, our grandchildren. Because I've got grandkids and I want them to grow up in a more harmonious world.
What a nice message to leave it with. He has a new record out, 1,000 Hands, latest single, his Firstborn Leader. It's the great Jon Anderson, the voice of Yes for so many years, and has this great solo project and a huge spiritual connection to the islands. It's great that you have that connection to Hawaii, Jon. I really do hope that this was a fun interview for you today, or at least one that got your mind working a little bit there as you sit in your home studio.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Dave, and I appreciate it. And we can't wait to get back to Kauai for our holidays. Aloha, aloha, this is Jon Anderson. You may know my voice from my years with Yes. Now you can know me as a fan of Hawaii Public Radio. I was a guest here with my friend Dave Lawrence. And public radio isn't free, so please support it with thanks.
You're the man. You're an animal over there. I give you big hugs and high fives. And yeah, certainly this crisis definitely did get started with the connection to nature. I would point out to you, Jon, it was a lot more about the rampant poaching that has been going on. That's something, here in Hawaii as the gateway to Asia, one of the topics that we talk about frequently on the show is the way that the insatiable demand for products like elephant ivory, rhino horn, pangolins, totoaba swim bladder. So when you think about this mess that we're in and the origins of it, there is absolutely no question those kind of markets where they're slaughtering animals, mixing animals together, and obviously creatures like pangolins, which are utterly defenseless and should never be harvested or used or removed from their environment. That's part of this crisis.
Boy. Yeah.
So I just point that out because I know that you're a spiritual guy who loves animals, and we're constantly trying to raise the awareness of creatures like the rhinos, the pangolins, the elephants, because they just have been suffering a withering assault.
Terrible. Really terrible.
So big hugs, high fives, stay safe.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, Jon, you're a good sport. I'm giving you a safe 6 foot away bowing to keep you safe.
Thank you. And enjoy the record. I sent you that song I did this morning.
Giving you a big extra love on doing that, Jon. Thank you for sending us the music.
Take care.
You too, brother. God bless.